Welcome back to Tech Visa. This is episode number 15. And as you can see, we're doing things slightly differently here today. We've got a very special guest in the building. Not only is he one of the most meticulous and well-organized humans that I know, he's one of the most genuine guys I've ever met. Will Lamb, welcome.
Thanks, Zach. That's really nice of you to say. Happy to join the channel and help with some information for our viewers.
Yeah, no, thanks for joining us today. Really, really nice to have you on. So Will, you're one of our senior migration agents here at Tech Visa. You manage our skills assessments. I'm excited to chat to you today for two reasons. Skills assessments, an area of immigration I'm not overly familiar with myself. So these questions are going to be authentic and things I genuinely want to know more information about. But also, it's such an underestimated process in itself. So I think it would be really good to take a bit of a deep dive into skills assessments today, pick your brain a little bit more, and go from there. So I guess just to kick things off, Will, what are skills assessments? How do they work? How do they fit into the visa application process? And why do we need them?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, the best way to think of a skills assessment is it's a certification by a government authorized peak body, normally across different skilled professions. And those bodies go in and have a look at a visa applicant's qualifications, work experience primarily. Basically, the certification is, or the skills assessment is, that they're attesting that this visa applicant is a qualified, skilled professional in whatever occupation they're in. How it fits into the visa application process is that normally for a few different types of visas, you require it. It's a prerequisite to become eligible for certain types of visas. It's a way for Home Affairs or the government to know that you're a qualified professional or skilled professional in your occupation.
Yeah. Okay, so Will, that partly does answer my question, but I know when we lodge in, say, for example, a 482 visa application, we need to provide various forms of evidence like previous work experience, qualifications, and so forth to show that that applicant is eligible for that visa subclass. So why do we have to submit a skills assessment in certain circumstances in addition to that evidence?
Yeah, sure. So number one, it's an actual visa criteria or requirement for certain kinds of visas. In a lot of cases for 482 visa holders or applicants, it's not required. In a lot of those cases, it's simple or simpler evidence is sufficient. If we're talking about what kinds of visas require a skills assessment, the primary one that we work with is the 186, subclass 186 employer nominated visa in the direct entry stream. That particular stream has that requirement for a skills assessment in the criteria. Other visas that are relevant are the general skilled migration visas. So these are the subclass 189, 190, and 491 visas. What we're talking about here is normally these skills assessments are called full skills assessments. Yep. There's also another type of skills assessment. It's a lesser level, I suppose. It's sometimes called a provisional skills assessment, and it's required for a different stream or a different subclass of visas, 485, temporary graduate visa in the graduate stream.
So Will, as we focus on predominantly tech here at Tech Visa, tech occupations, what skill assessing bodies do you predominantly work with when lodging these skills assessments?
Yeah, sure. So the number one that we work with is ACS, or the Australian Computing Society, and they look after software engineers, developer programmers, ICT business analysts, a range of IT related occupations. And that's similarly the case across other professions as well. So, for example, VetAssess is one that covers a range of different occupations. They're a bit of a catch-all. For example, marketing specialists and others. Engineers, for example, are covered by a body called Engineers Australia. And then there's others across, accountants and all the different skilled professions that are out there.
All right, Will. So from my limited understanding of skills assessments and the process involved, one thing I do know is that it's an extremely intricate process. So it can be more document heavy than a visa application itself. So in terms of preparing for a skills assessment as, say, a candidate or a visa applicant, what are we looking at in terms of processing times, how long these things take to put together, collating documents, and so on?
Yeah, I mean, I do consider it quite, relatively close to a visa application, I suppose. A lot of the same documents are needed. And in some cases, it's you need to go into more detail and provide more evidence than what a general visa application would need. And that's all to do, or all fits within the requirements of each assessing body. So they each have their own requirements, criteria, document requirements, all that kind of thing. And essentially what they're looking at, I mean, if we go back to what the skills assessment is, it's a certification of your qualifications and your employment experience to show that you are a qualified, skilled professional in your occupation. So when you think of that, then obviously you need evidence to back that up, right? So think of qualification documents like your degree certificate, for example, your transcript from your studies. And then in terms of employment experience, it's quite a range, but very simply, it's things like a reference letter from your employer to kind of show what you did while you were working for them, how long you were there, as well as payment evidence to kind of back that up to show, you're working there for the time that you're claiming. So things like pay slips, bank statements showing salary deposits and things like that.
From the time you engage an applicant to commence this process of applying for a skills assessment, what do these timeframes look like up until, say, that skills assessment is approved or granted?
Yeah, sure. So it varies greatly. So
depending on how diligent the applicant is as well, right?
That's part of it. Yeah. Definitely. I think, the main thing that holds things up is, the availability of documentation. So some of the time applicants have trouble, gathering documents from overseas. Maybe they're very old documents from a few years ago. Or things from back home that they're not sure where they are. For example, some people go home and will get their mum or dad to, take a picture of their degree certificate, right? It's hanging up on the wall somewhere in the bedroom or whatever. Those kinds of situations kind of push it back. I suppose if I was generalizing, I would say roughly maybe a month to get all of your documentation together, the things that I talked about, payment evidence and going through your bank statements, finding all these different documents in your old emails or wherever you've got them saved. Once the application's prepared and lodged to the assessing body, processing times are kind of out of our hands. But what we're seeing at the moment is, through ACS for those IT-related occupations, processing times are in the range of 10 to 12 weeks. They've been coming through a little bit quicker lately, but earlier in the year they did blow out a little bit. So it really comes and goes. VetAssess is a little bit longer at the moment. What we're seeing is, probably a few months, so 3, 4, 5 months kind of range. What I would say to do with around those processing times is that in some cases there's priority processing available as well. You can only get priority processing if your visa is less than 12 weeks or has less than 12 weeks of validity. But other bodies have different requirements if they offer it at all, and sometimes at a cost.
All right, Will, so we're embarking on this journey, applying for a visa that needs a skills assessment. Do we first need to apply for the skills assessment? Do we need to have it on hand prior to lodging that visa application? Or can we lodge the visa application first and then apply for the skills assessment? Or how does it work in terms of priority and order?
Generally, for most of the types of visas that I mentioned before, it's a visa requirement. So in that case, you need the positive outcome on hand to become eligible for the visa. And in those cases, you need to provide it upfront when you lodge the visa application. An exception to this would be the temporary graduate 485 visa that I spoke about before in that graduate work stream, where you can provide just evidence that you've applied for your skills assessment at least when you lodge that visa application.
All right, Will, there's whispers getting around in regards to changes with skills assessments. What have you heard as the in-house expert?
Well, the Department of Home Affairs released a media release probably a couple of months ago now. They're asking for feedback on the skills assessment. They're looking to see if there's ways to improve the system, basically. They're asking for feedback on new standards for skilled migration assessments and those authorities that conduct those assessments. I mean, I see it every day. But the government also described it as, complex, costly, and lengthy in terms of time frames, which is
true.
It can be, definitely. Just looking at those the processing times that I talked about before, that's evidence of that, right? So it can take quite a while, and it should be quicker, I think, in terms of when you're thinking about migrants waiting around, trying to become eligible for PR, you've got employers that are trying to sponsor people, get employees through and, work done, I suppose. It's good for industry. So it'd be better for everyone if it's, quicker, faster, more streamlined, I suppose.
Okay, so that's the kind of outcome we're hoping for, is a more streamlined approach moving
Fingers
forward.
crossed, yeah.
Excellent. All right, Will, so as migration agents, we see predominantly two types of applicants, right? So ones that are preparing far in advance. They know exactly what they want. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have the frantic ones. They've either done something wrong, they're freaking out, they have limited time left on their current visa. What are some common mistakes and pitfalls that you see come across your desk, and specifically in regards to skills assessments?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. There are those different kinds of applicants. What I would say is, number one, in terms of common mistakes, and it takes various forms. Essentially, it's different forms of not meeting that particular assessing body's requirements, right? Whether it be you're applying for the wrong occupation, or you're applying with the wrong type of qualification. Sometimes, depending on what qualifications you have, you can apply for different types of skills assessments. Or in the case of ACS, for example, depending on the type of qualification you have, you need to provide evidence of a certain number of years of experience, right? So, for example, the higher the qualification, the less experience you need to show. The lower the qualification, the more experience you need to show. Okay. Because in either case, you need to show that you're skilled, right? And if you've got a higher qualification, you don't really need to show as much employment experience. In terms of that employment evidence, there's quite a few pitfalls and ways you can go wrong there. It might be a case of, your employment reference being in the wrong format, not having certain wording that the assessing body prefers or mandates, or just missing certain details. In terms of things like payment evidence, that's something that you can really go wrong on, because there's only certain forms of payment evidence that the assessing bodies accept. And it needs to, I think a lot of people go wrong in terms of maybe providing the wrong payslip, right? Or evidence for the wrong dates, and then it doesn't really show what you're trying to show. So there's quite a few pitfalls. I guess that's the value in having a professional like ourselves to kind of know what the ins and outs are, what the assessing bodies are looking for. Reading something in black and white on a guideline is a little bit different to having someone explain it to you, or it's hard to tell sometimes whether the documents you have are what they require.
All right, Will, to wrap things up, what is one piece of advice you'd give to a visa applicant that's embarking on the skills assessment journey?
It kind of ties back to what I just talked about in terms of mistakes and pitfalls. So, as I said, there's different forms of evidence you can provide. And so I think a lot of people sometimes worry that maybe, I don't know where those pay slips are, or, I can't get that bank statement that shows those salary payments. And so I guess my tip is that there's a lot of times there's various forms of evidence that can be accepted, right? So while you might not have the primary forms that are on the guidelines or requirements, you can provide alternative evidence. So things like, tax records, let's say, or superannuation statements, maybe, for periods where you've been self-employed, there's different forms of evidence needed there, right? So maybe it's a statutory declaration, maybe it's a reference from a colleague. Again, it varies from each body to body, and what their particular requirements are, and they are different. But there's different ways that you can evidence the same thing, I suppose.
Awesome. Will, thanks for your time. If you did enjoy that, be sure to subscribe and like this video. Until next time, cheers.